I studied Masters in Fine Art at Central St. Martin's. We're invited by Mark Nash and Isaac Julien to 56 Venice Biennale. Well, I'm interested in state power and politics. And when I read this opportunity, I thought this was quite interesting for my practice.
So basically, I'm doing this AMA with Central St. Martin, and I'm currently working with a theme that relates to social unrest in the UK in the last 30 years. So because I was talking of that, some problems of identities as well, the black community, and this is, I guess, what made me came here to that project. So that's why it's very important, because I knew Isaac Julien's previous work, and it was important for me to know a bit more about his practice, because it's really relevant for what I do at the moment.
Well, the work that I'm going to be showing at Venice is actually work behind me, Capital, and that work is a work which began at the Hayward. I was invited to participate in an exhibition where the idea of the educational part of curating became the centre stage for an exhibition. My actual project was to have a discussion with David Harvey to basically look at this question of capital and to see if I was able to get an audience that would be half invited and half public that would also engage in this topic. And one of the things that we tried to do was to really look at what Marx could be for a contemporary generation. How does it resonate? How's capital changed? How does it function in the art world? How does crises help capital, or how does it affect people's lives? We're here at the Biennale, and this piece by Ibrahim Bahama is one of my favourite works because of the scale of the work and just the sort of proposition of getting these cocoa bags from Ghana, transporting them and making them become part of this sculptural environment. And here we have in the Arsenale a very significant work about labour and commodities. And of course we know that Ghana was the centre for cocoa production, and I think that this is a very fitting tribute to kind of this kind of scale of production of labour and raw material, and the way that it's represented in this kind of flagging of this corridor space. It's a brilliant intervention, I think.
My name is Ernst. I'm from Vienna in Austria, and I'm doing an MA in fine art photography at the moment. One thing that's really apparent this year is that there is a lot of political content, and it makes me often wonder why lots of students, including myself, have not got a very strong political content in their work. What particularly stood out for me were the photographs of Walker Evans. They still speak to us today when these people from the Depression in America look at us. And there's also a sadness there, because there's still so much poverty, and a lot of the artists today also engage with these subjects. It gives us an idea that time changes, but in a way it doesn't.
This is Kutlu Ataman's work, and he did a portrait of Sakıp Sabancı, a Turkish businessman, with these passport-sized photographs. Sakıp Sabancı was born in Kayseri, and he moved to Adana, where he established his business, and he became one of the most important businessmen in Turkey. His kind of businesses and charity works are still all around Turkey. These are ID photos of his workers that work in factories. And, half of my family worked in his factories as well.
Sums up the happiness of the working class in the words, quote, "Human life is but in 9 cases out of 10 often a struggle for existence."
I really like Isaac's idea, which was encouraged by the curator of the Biennale, I think, to go back to Marx and actually read the original text.
There is a problem reading Marx today because it's really set in the 19th century, although it's a really fresh perspective and kind of overarching way to understand the world today, which is still really relevant because we're still working and living in capital's rule.
Cotton famine of 1862-3. Dr. Edward Smith was charged by the Privy Council to make an investigation into the conditions of nourishment of the distressed cotton workers of Lancashire and Cheshire. His observations during many preceding years had led him to the conclusion that, quote, "to avert starvation diseases," end quote, the daily food of an average woman ought to contain at least 3,900 grains of carbon and 180 grains.
What the project means, the Capital project means, in terms of it being performed here at the Biennale, is to think about the actual setup of the performance. So you've got 2 speakers, they swap between speaking the text, and then you also have a really interesting part is they have the footnotes on a screen being scrolled down as they're reading. So you're listening to the text, but you're also reading the footnotes, and you're also connecting with them through their voices. And you've got these different elements going on, and there's different layers of information, and there's different kinds of voices coming through. So there's the orators' voices who are speaking Capital, and then you've got this other level where you're understanding the facts and figures, the epistemological implications of what they're saying. Particularly reading we saw, there was a lot of discussion of imbibing carbon, and I think it was nitrogen, which was very peculiar because he was talking about eating bread, basically.
In a kind of funny way, I still kind of benefit from capital world as well. I come from a very small city, and I live in London now. And in this city, I can be myself. I can create what I want to, and I can say what I want to say. At the moment, I'm working on a feature documentary about process that I'm going through, which is taking necessary steps to get a pink certificate in Istanbul. Pink certificate means avoiding my military service duty by proving my homosexuality. It is quite difficult to go those tests and be in front of those people that I don't know, and each time I have to deal with that, I feel smaller and smaller. It's quite humiliating. It's quite horrifying as well. But I'm kind of motivating myself to create something out of that, to be a voice. And it's quite important if I can manage that, because then I feel I survived that process. Otherwise, it will be all for nothing.
You go into the Biennale show and you see these images of war and destruction and political engagement, and there is this darkness, but I think the darkness is important to not to shut out, but to actually engage with it, and by engaging it and by looking at it, some light enters the darkness, I think. And so I think the criticism that you often hear about the Biennale this year being too political, too dark, too depressing is actually maybe a compliment.